I kind of feel like, Mr. Rogers. I'm just not nearly as fucking cool as Mr. Rogers, nor as captivating. We are reading C.G. Jung, Volume 11 of the Collected Works. This is Psychology and Religion, West and East. A psychological approach to the dogma of the Trinity. We are on chapter 5. Chapter 5 is called It's definitely called something. It's called The Problem of the Fourth. And we are on subset number 3 on chapter 5, The Problem of the Fourth, in Psychology, Religion, East and West, a psychological approach to the dogma of the Trinity. Subset 3 is called General Remarks on Symbolism. I really smell rotten eggs. Ugh. I don't know if that's good. Probably not so much. Although it is extremely improbable that the Christian Trinity is derived directly from the triadic world soul, and that Timaeus, it is nevertheless rooted in the same archetype if we wish to describe the phenomenology of this archetype. We shall have to consider all the aspects which go to make up the total picture. For instance, in our analysis of the Timaeus, we found that the number 3 represents an intellectual schema only, and that the second mixture reveals the resistance of the recurrent fourth ingredient, which we meet again at the adversary of Christian Trinity. Without the fourth, the 3 have no reality as we understand it. They even lack meaning. For a thought has meaning only if it refers to a possible or actual reality. This relationship to reality is completely lacking in the idea of the Trinity. So much so that people nowadays tend to lose sight of it altogether, without even noticing the loss. But we can see what this loss means when we are faced with the problem of reconstruction. That is to say, in all those cases where the conscious part of the psyche is cut off from the unconscious part of the dissociation. The split can only be mended if consciousness is able to formulate conceptions which give adequate expression to the contents of unconscious. It seems as if the Trinity plus the incommensurable fourth were a conception of this kind. As part of the doctrine of salvation, it must indeed have a saving, healing, wholesome effect during the process of integrating the unconscious contents in consciousness. Undoubted importance attaches to the business of seeing how the dream symbols relate to the trivial everyday realities. But in a deeper sense, and on a long-term view, this procedure is not sufficient, as it fails to bring out the significance of the archetypical contents. These reach down or up to quite other levels than so-called common sense would suspect. As a priori conditions of all psychic events, they are induced with a dignity which has found immemorial expressions in godlike figures. No other formulation will satisfy the needs of the unconscious. The unconscious is the unwritten history of mankind. From time, unrecorded, rational formulate may satisfy the present and the immediate past, but not the expression or experience of mankind as a whole. This calls for the all-embracing vision of the myth as expressed in symbols. If the symbol is lacking, man's wholeness is not represented in consciousness. He remains more or less accidental fragment, a suggestible wisp of a consciousness at the mercy of all the utopian fantasies that rush to fill the gap left by the totality symbols. A symbol cannot be made to order as a rationalist would like to believe. It is a legitimate symbol only if it gives expression to the immutable structure of the unconsciousness and can, therefore, command general acceptance, so long as it evokes belief spontaneously. It does not require to be understood in any other way, but if, from sheer lack of understanding, belief in it begins to wane, then, for better or worse, one must use understanding as a tool. If the incalculable consequences of a loss are to be avoided, what should we then put in place as the symbol? Is there anybody who knows a better way of expressing something that has never yet been understood? So as I have shown in psychology and alchemy and elsewhere, Trinity and Quatrinity symbols occur fairly frequently in dreams, and from this I have learnt that the idea of Trinity is based on something that can be experienced and must therefore have meaning. This insight was not won by a study of the traditional sources. If I have succeeded in forming an intelligible conception of the Trinity that is in any way based on empirical reality, I have been helped by dreams, folklore, and myths, in which these numbers motifs occur. As a rule, they appear spontaneously in dreams, and such dreams look very banal. From the outside, there is nothing at all of the myth or fairy tale about them. Much less anything religious. Mostly it is three men and a woman either sitting at a table or driving in a car, or three men and a dog, a huntsman with their three hounds, three chickens in a coop from which the fourth has escaped, and such like. These things are indeed so banal that one is apt to overlook them, nor do they wish to say anything more specific at first than that they refer to functions and aspects of the dreamer's personality, as can easily be ascertained when they appear as three or four known persons with well-marked characteristics, or as the four principal colors red, blue, green, and yellow. It happens with some regularity that these colors are correlated with the four orienting functions of consciousness. Only when the dreamer begins to reflect that the four are an illusion to his total personality does he realize that these banal dreams motifs are like shadow pictures of more important things. The fourth figure is, as a rule, particularly instructive. It soon becomes incompatible, disagreeable, frightening, or in some way odd, with a different sense of good and bad rather than a Tom Thumb. Besides his three normal brothers, naturally the situation can be reversed with three odd figures and one normal one. Anybody with a little knowledge of fairy tales will know that the seemingly enormous gulf that separates the Trinity from these trivial happenings is by no means unbridgeable. But this is not to say that the Trinity can be reduced to this level. On the contrary, the Trinity represents the most perfect form of the archetype. In questions, the empirical maternity merely shows, I don't know what this little fucking dot means, merely shows in the smallest and most insignificant psychic detail how the archetype works. This is what makes the archetype so important, firstly, as an organizing schema and a criterion for judging the quality of an individual psychic structure, and secondly, as a vehicle of the synthesis, in which the individuation process culminates. This goal is symbolized by the putting together of the four, hence the quatrinity is a symbol of the self, which is of central importance in Indian philosophy and takes the place of the deity. In the West, why amounts of quatrinities were developed during the Middle Ages. Here I would mention only the Rex Glorae with the four symbols of the evangelist, three theomorphic, one anthropomorphic in Gnosticism. There is the figure of Barbello, God is four. These examples, and many others like them, bring the Quaternity into closest relationship with the deity, so that, as I said earlier, it is impossible to distinguish the self from a God image. At any rate, I personally have found it impossible to discover a criterion of distinction where here faith or philosophy alone can decide, neither of which has anything to do with the empiricism of the scientist. One can then explain the God image aspect of the Quaternity as a reflection of the self, or conversely, explain the self as an imago Dei in man. Both propositions are psychologically true, since the self, which can only be perceived subjectively as a most intimate and unique thing, requires universally as a background, for without this it could not manifest itself in its absolute separateness. Strictly speaking, the self must be regarded at the extreme opposite of God. Nevertheless, we must say, with Angelus Silesius, he cannot live without me, nor I without him. So, although the empirical symbol requires two diametrically opposite interpretations, neither of them can be proved valid. The symbol means both and therefore a paradox. This is not the place to say anything more about this role these numbers symbols play in practice. For this I must refer the reader to the Dream Material in Psychology and Alchemy, Part 2. Which ironically I have that, and it's been mentioned a couple of times in this particular book. It has a little dot here in the subsection, so I'm going to pause at the moment, go turn off the water, I'm trying to unclog drains, and be back for the rest of that subset.